Well guys, today is the day. We're going to start building our Kawasaki 750 engine. And what we're going to do first is we got to get all of the parts cleaned up. And what I've done here is I have set up a washing station, just a plain old plastic tub. There is nothing inside of it, it's all empty. We have holes drilled in the top for grease and water to flow when we rinse each part. And I have, of course, my cup of coffee here, and we have water. This is just normal tap water. We're going to be rinsing the parts as soon as we scrub them with degreaser. We want to get all the old oil and grease off of them, and then we will blow dry them. I'll have Kyler, my son, over there. Kyler. I will have him blow them off as soon as I get done cleaning them. I'm going to set the camera up on the tripod. We're going to get going. Okay guys, now we have the crank, piston rods, piston heads, and the transmission gears cleaned up, dried up, degreased, ready to start assembly. That's where we're going next. Here's something I wanted to show you, a little tip. Inside the piston rings, it gets a little carbon buildup. These aren't too bad, but if these were bad, what I would do is I would take one of the old rings and I would use this sharp edge here, and I would run it through the groove back and forth until I was to clean out the, trying to do this with one hand here, I would just scrape it along carefully. You don't want to gouge the aluminum, you just want to clean out the groove. But as you could see, it's pretty clean. But if this was to have a lot of carbon buildup, that edge right there would easily clean all the carbon out of the rings, and that way you don't have to get a screwdriver in it, because a screwdriver would really gouge things up. But this way here, if you're careful, you can clean all the carbon and crap out of there, so the rings will be free in there and they won't bind up. Just a tip. Okay everyone, here's the first step. First step is to get the parts installed back inside the cases that need to be there when we close them up. Okay, and that mainly consists of the crank, the transmission gears, which are right here. They're all dried up and ready to go. Prior to putting the case on, I'm going to cover these with a little bit of motor oil, just to make sure that we're lubricated. I picked up some engine assembly lube. This is what we will use to coat all the bearings and stuff with, so that we don't fire it up and it be completely dry. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all the bolts from the mating surfaces And the reason for that is because I need to clean all the old silicone away from those areas so that when we get new silicone put on, it's going to adhere beautifully. There's some bolts holding on the oil tubes here. We're going to pull those off, blow them out, make sure they're not clogged with anything, so that we know that if our oil pump's good, it's going to pump fluid throughout these tubes without any obstruction. The oil pump is not plastic impellers like on some of these models I have read about. They're actually the metal type, like on most foreign, or I should call them import vehicles. There's a little wear right here, but nothing I can really feel. So there's nothing plugging up the ports. So we'll just reinstall this, get everything back together, and start our assembly. Okay, now, where we're at now is we've primed the oil pump, we've checked it and make sure that everything's good there. We've checked to make sure that the oil tubes are nice and clean. This is the return one. This is where the oil comes back into the oil sump here. Now what we'll do is we'll pull off all the bolts around the cases here, and then we'll get some scrapers and start scraping. One of the things I found on this engine when I was tearing it apart is that there was water in the oil, and I could not figure out where that water was coming from. The head gaskets didn't look too bad, but there was some signs. But I ordered a seal, which on the diagram I thought it was for the water pump, but I was wrong. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop here, order a new part, and then continue on a week later when I get that part. Or I go out to Mesa to the Kawasaki dealership and buy one from there. It might be the same price. I'll find out. Okay, so I was able to go to the local Kawasaki dealership, and I was able to get this bearing all for the water pump. This bearing here The one that I had was rusted and it was shot. So this seal here was definitely leaking, and that's the seal that's on the inside of the engine. So I also bought this seal right here. This is called a mechanical seal, and I don't know if this was leaking or not, but at least I have them now. And all these two seals and this bearing here was $66 total. So we're going to go ahead and start installing them. Here's the old bearing, or old seal, which is this one right here. Toss that aside. Ready? First of all, we're going to have to clean this area out so it's nice and clean. Flashlight here. Oh yeah, definitely dirty. Oh man, that cleaned up nice. Next, we have to reinstall this bearing here. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. And there you go. She's all cleaned up, ready to go. Now we'll go ahead and install this one, but after I install it, I'm going to pack it with some assembly lube just to make sure that we are lubed up and not going to bind on anything when this thing fires up. I will have to go find another socket to fit on this here. It can go in either way. There's no specific way. Okay, for this part, I'm going to use an 18mm impact. It's a little larger, but I believe it'll come in here and fully seat flushed. Or flush, I should say. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm just barely tapping it in there, and then when I see it going in, I hit it hard. I don't lube up these bearings because, for one, there's a little bit of oily residue left on the mating surfaces. So I just tap it in, and then once I see that it's going in, then I'll hit it firmly to seat it. And it feels like it's sticking out just a hair. So I'm going to hit it on the side just to see if I can get it to go in just a little bit more. Okay, that feels fully seated. Now I'm gonna pack some of this assembly lube. And this will keep this bearing nice and lubed up until oil starts to flow everywhere. Feels nice and smooth. And I don't know if you've ever packed a wheel bearing, but this is kind of like the same thing. I'm just scraping it on the edge, pushing it in, and hopefully it will go all the way through to the other side like you do a normal wheel bearing. Now I have to flip it over and get the other side in. See that there's a little bit of rusty substance here. I'm going to go ahead and take a wire wheel and clean that all off, make it nice and clean. Okay, so I took the wire wheel and cleaned up all that rust and everything so that these seals are going to sit on there nice and smoothly. Okay. All right, for this seal, well, actually first we need to get this bearing in here. So we need to get, again, the 18 millimeter. Looks like it's going to work fantastically in here. As you can hear the change in the sound. Beautiful. Okay, now we'll get the mechanical seal started. Now, to scrape the gaskets off around here before I put the impeller on there. Because once I put the impeller in, it's spinning around, and stick the lock ring on it, we're pretty much done. Here we are, guys. We're back. Camera's fully charged. So what I did off camera is I just cleaned the mounting surfaces as well as where the cans mount to. I cleaned all that up. I still have to fine clean it with some alcohol to make sure that we're all oh, this is stiff. This water pump is really stiff. I don't understand why it's so stiff, but it's not that bad. Spins just like the other one did. Alrighty, so with everything clean, now we've got to get the crank installed. And something that I was trying to figure out yesterday was the fact that the rods felt a little weird. When I first installed the rods, they're not completely torqued down, but they're pretty much tight. I was getting a little side-to-side wobble in them, see that? But I was not getting any up and down wobble, which was really weird. It almost felt like the rod bearings were too large. But you see that G right there, the light going? That G there stands for what size bearing you use in this rod and crank. Well, G is the standard, and I bought the standard bearings. So my guess is that what I feel is normal. It's very slight, so I'm not really going to panic too much. So what I have to do, I already took care of this here. It has a brand new bearing, and I've already cleaned the bearing mating surfaces. A lot of people don't really pay much attention to what's under the bearing, but you see all the stuff that's on that surface there? Well, it needs to be cleaned off because you want your bearing to sit very flush. And I know that doesn't look like much, but it only takes a second to clean each one of them, so why not do it right? I'll be right back and I'll show you what it looks like after it's done. As you can tell now, the surfaces are very clean now. I just took some very light sandpaper, very fine sandpaper, and I just very carefully took off that debris that was on there. So yeah, now we're ready to install the new bearings and get it mounted and torqued down to the crankshaft. To properly mount the rods on the crank, you have to get the code letter facing the back of the engine. This is the side that the flywheel attaches to. Here are the numbers or letters, and when the rods are upward in place, they are facing the rear of the engine. That is the proper way to mount the rods onto the crank. Now we'll reinstall the crank into the engine block and continue from there. Okay, now we got the crankshaft in, got the new rod bearings in, we got all the transmission mounted up. Right now we are ready to put the case together. One thing to keep in mind is the rods have to be put in their place before you join the two together, because if you don't do that, then the rod is going to be too close to the side of the case and you're not going to be able to install the pistons because they're going to be offset. So you have to make sure that you have these in the right place. So now we'll go ahead and track down the nipple for the oil filter. That has to go in right here before you join them, actually on this side, because I'm going to take this piece, lift it up, and set it over. No alcohol? No. Okay, so now I will take some alcohol, just plain old rubbing alcohol, and I will clean the mating surfaces so that they're all free of oil and grease, because we want to make sure that we get a good seal when we put this together, because these don't have gaskets. They have just a thin layer of silicone to mate them together. So you want to make sure that both sides are very clean. Get another clean spot. Go ahead and start on this side. And you can see, although I scraped them, the grease on here is pretty intense. So that's why I cleaned it with alcohol prior to laying my silicone on there. This little notch here slides into the notch on the inside of the oil pump. So the oil pump and the water pump is driven by the same shaft, which is right here. So we'll line them straight up and down, and that way they'll mesh up a little easier. Okay, so I think I'm ready to put these babies together. Okay, well, we've got the piston rods in the right spot. We've got everything snugged up. Now we need to torque it all down. All right, so here is the first can. This is going to go on the back of the engine. This is where the piston goes up and down in. I'm going to start by degreasing it, cleaning it up, and then we'll clean the gasket off, and then we'll start honing out the cylinder and getting it ready to install. Okay, now we're going to install the pistons inside the cylinders. In an engine like this, the pistons have to be installed in the cylinders, and then when you're installing the cylinders, the pistons are going to be like this, just barely sticking out. And what you have to do is slide the pin in and then push the cylinders on after the pin is inside, which is very difficult to master. I'll probably have to take a couple stabs at it just to get it right. In any piston ring install, you always want to start with installing the oil ring first, okay? I don't think this really has anything to do with anything, but I always like to have to where the ends are pointing down like that. It probably doesn't matter at all, but that's the way that I like to do it, is the way that I was shown, and that's the way that it always seems to work just fine for me. So what I do is I put the end that connects right over here, and then we'll take the outer part of the oil ring, which is these guys right here. Whoops, I'm wrong. It's these guys. I knew that one felt a little thin. There's no wrong or right way to put these in, except you want to stagger them. So I'll start the bottom ring here and just carefully work around. You don't want to bend these at all. And you want to get them on nice and straight and even, because last thing you want to do is bend these rings, because then you will never have your oil where it should be. Okay, so now We'll start the top one right here on the opposite side of the upper one. Just bring them around, just like that. So now the opening of the center ring is over here. The lower ring is over here, and the upper ring is over here. So they are opposite of each other. Okay, so now we're going to put on the compression rings. Okay. Due to the fact that we have a black one and we have a silver one, and what we're going to do is we're going to put the silver one on first, black one on top. I think that's how it goes. I have to pause this. You are in my video, sir.
No.
Yes, you
Look
are.
at it.
Sometimes.
Freaking add people in here. Oh,
Real
reverse
close to having 100 subscribers.
it. Gee, that's fast.
All right, folks, this is the head. This is the first head that we're going to put on. This is the one for the rear of the engine. And we're going to get this baby mounted. But first of all, we're going to have to pull all the valves out and everything and overhaul the head.
it's $20 for Xbox One.
This tool here I created a long time ago, and it was perfect for getting up underneath these way down there and popping them off the valve guides. Okay, back at it now. First thing we got to do is we've got to clean off the tips of these valve stems. Take my pick. Take my pick. Take my pick. Which ones? By the looks of these valves, this could be why it had low compression. A lot of buildup on these valve seats here. Could very possibly be it. Alright, to reseat these valves, you always want to lubricate the valve stem so that, for one, it spins freely in the valve guide and you're not binding anything up, because last thing you want to do is damage the valve stem. That way there, the valve will rock in place and then you're going to be shit out of luck. See if we can get. Okay, good. There we go. Now go ahead and put some valve lapping compound on to this valve. Oops. Don't have to put a whole lot. I like to start with a whole lot, and then when I go to recoat it, then I put a little less. And when you're doing this, you don't have to push very hard. just a little bit of pressure to get the grit going. And I like to lift up and rotate at 90 degrees every now and then. Kind of pulls some unused stuff in there. And you will have it come off a couple times. Imagine doing this to an engine that has 16 valves per head. But you should be able to see the line that's starting to form around there. It's starting to strip the carbon filled area off. And if you look at it real close, let's see if we can get it to focus. I don't know if you can see there's little pitting on there, and that all has to come off in order for the valve to seat properly. All right, I'm going to show you how I check to see if it's solid. If that valve is pushed in there nice and solid like that, I should be able to take a bright light and shine it right here and look through here, the exhaust port, and not see any light coming around that valve. Be right back. Okay, with the lights off, I know it's hard to see, but if I was to shine this light here and flip this up like this, you see the light come through there? I'm shining this all around and I can actually see light. I don't know if you able to see that on the, no, you can't see that, but I can see glimpses of light coming through a little bit of this valve. So what I do at this point is I just keep going. I add some more in there and I keep going. The intake valves are going to be beautiful. They're going to be easy to do. Intake valves always are easy because they don't build up that very hard crustiness. There is a tool you set up in here and you grind that down and then you lap the valves in, but I don't have that tool. You don't need it. That just makes time go by so much better. This way works, it just takes time. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video. You really don't wanna watch me do this. It's time consuming and very boring. But I will come back when all of them are done and we'll move forward. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. I've got the head on in the last video already finished, put together, and mounted on the engine. I wanted to go ahead and get all of these done. The valves are all seated and this is ready to go back together. I'm ready to put all the valve seals back in here and get it going. So I'm going to go ahead and take the valves out and get the valve seals installed. Okay, here we go. Okay, in the service manual, the inner springs can be no shorter than 1.33. And I don't know if you can see that on camera there, but that is 1.39. That's right about where all of them are. And the maximum, because there is a maximum, is 1.41. So it's right in the middle of the acceptable range. And we'll check this one out. 1.393. That's another good spring. So we'll do the outer ones now. Outer ones should be no greater than 1.55. Or I should say no less than 1.55. And we got 1.61. The maximum is 1.63. So we're within specs there. Last spring for the 1.625. Okay, we are still within parameters on the springs. So we can reuse these without any problem. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll set the first spring in there. And we will get our spring compressor. This is the one I am using. It actually, bring this up a little bit so you can see a little better. I actually bought this for a foreign car, and it has worked on every head that I've tried to use it on. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get this first spring clamped down. Trying to get this positioned to where you will be able to see. That looks pretty good right there. Okay, these are keepers. These are really small ones. And they go on top of the valve stem right in here. And these here, it's a really tight area, and what I've learned to do is place a little bit of grease on each one, and then when you place them in there, the grease will hold it in there while you undo the compressor. That's the theory anyway. We place a little bit of grease on each one of these, and you kind of got to just drop them in there and then put them into position with your pick. Oops. Grease will even stick to the pick, so it helps you out.
What if you don't have a pick?
Use a flathead screwdriver. My son just asked me, well, what if you don't have a pick? My answer was, you're shit out of luck. No, just kidding. You can use a flathead screwdriver, a small one, and that should assist you just the same. Gotta get it flipped around here. There we go. Should be able to pop this out now. Nope, we had one pop out. There we go. Okay, we got them in now. And that's the way it's supposed to look like when it is done properly. I'm going to go ahead and speed through and get all of them done real quick. Okay, I've got all the valves in. I've got the lifters. These are the little hydraulic valve lash adjusters. You see that little hole there? You're supposed to pump them up in oil until the air bubbles stop flowing. And then you carefully insert them into the slots here, and then you're all set to go. And the rocker arms get placed right on top of that, and like this. You can't really insert these in wrong, because if you see how this one, let me see if you can see this. See how this one fits in here like this? If I was to put the other one in here, it would fit exactly the same because they are all the same. There is no difference between any of these, so you don't have to worry about putting them in wrong. They just have to be put in right. And the last step before we will be ready to install this on the engine block is to install the keepers. I like to put a little bit of flex on them to make them work a little better. Okay. All right, go ahead and get this done. Okay. All right, so now this head is ready to install onto the engine. And this one will actually fit on the front of the engine like that right there. Okay, I'm going to switch around the camera, get it down on the block, and we'll go from there. Okay, first of all, we will get the gasket in here. And these are original Kawasaki parts. I have not put any aftermarket parts on this engine yet. For one, you really can't find them. All right, go ahead and take some alcohol. Get any greasy substances off of the head surface here so we can have a nice tight seal. And as soon as I get all the timing attached and it's all timed, before I install the side covers, I'm actually going to go through and do a compression test. And that way there I'll see if all my timing's correct. I'll make sure that my compression is right so that I know I won't have any problems when I fire it up for real. Okay, you want to make sure all the holes are lining up. Make sure your guide sleeves are in here. That's very important to make sure the head sits on there perfect, because these water ports here need to be absolutely perfect. So, okay, well, now we'll lay the head down on it. Before we do though, we'll go ahead and throw some. Make sure we get a nice clean surface here. Here we go. Okay, she's down on the head surface right now. Here are some washers that have to be placed on the studs. There you go. Okay, so here's the 14. We'll go ahead and get these finger tight. We'll find the other nuts. There's a nut that goes here, and there's a nut that goes on the other side in the same area. These two long skinny ones go at the front here on each side of the front cam bearings. Here's the two nuts that go down here. And one goes over here on the other side. Those are 13 millimeter. Nope, those are 12. Those are 12s. Okay, so. Alright, so we'll go ahead and find the torque specs out. The torque specs for these stud nuts, the ones that go on the long studs, are a two-step, 18 then 29 foot-pounds. Oops. Okay, I'm just going to snug them all up, and then I'll take them to 18. Okay, all of the large ones are torqued down properly. Two-stage, 18, then 29. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the small ones up front, and their torque spec is, okay, these front ones are going to be all the way down to 10 foot-pounds. Those are 10. Okay. Looks like it. Okay. Not really worried about it. There's two little tiny little nuts that go in the front of the head right here. These here I cannot get a torque wrench on, so you're going to have to trust me on this. These front ones are 10 millimeter. And we'll just tighten them up to where they feel right. Okay, yeah, that feels good. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and do the side ones, and those are pretty much the same thing. I will not be able to get a torque wrench on them, so we just tighten them up. It is about 115 degrees outside right now. As you can probably see, I'm sweating pretty good right now. Okay, looks good to me. All right, guys, we have both heads mounted. And now I'm going to go ahead and end this part, because the next step, we're going to go and install all the timing stuff and then the cams. One other thing I want to comment on. Okay, there's these little brass screens here. It's very important that you get these in here, and it goes right down that hole there, and make sure that it's fully seated and it's flat in there and not on its side. You could use the spring that belongs in there. This spring actually belongs in there, and then it compresses down to hold that screen down while oil filters through it. Okay, well, one last thing before we end the video. I wanted to show everyone my parts washing tank here. I showed you in the very start of this video here that I created this to wash parts on, and I have to say it worked out very nicely. It collected all of my old water and oil, and after I'm all done washing parts, I'm going to go ahead and take this outside and take the lid off of it and let it all evaporate in the heat, and then I can scrape all of the crap off and dispose of it properly once all the water's evaporated out of there. But that's my parts cleaning tank there, and I think it worked out very nicely. All right, guys, here we are. Kyler's on his future bike. There's the Patient that we're working on right now. Pretty soon we'll have that engine ready and go back in there. And then we can fire it up, and you all can see that this video wasn't a waste of time. Anyway, thank you for watching this part. Part 3 will be coming out in a few weeks. It will take me a while to gather up the parts and get everything else back together. Thank you for watching Cobra Vids, and we're going to see you on the next video. Say bye, Kyler.
Bye.